Let me start with the ugly truth, because I need you to know exactly how dark this story gets. My own daughter, Serena, sent me a text message on my 65th birthday that wasn't just cold. It was an execution. It contained 12 words that severed our relationship. But the real blow, the thing that changed my grief into ice, was that her husband, Blake, hit the like button on it. He gave her cruelty a digital round of applause. That little red heart cost them everything. If you believe there's nothing worse than family betrayal, then you need to stick around, because I'm going to show you what happens when a father decides to fight back. Not with anger, but with absolute silence and $35 million of leverage. If you have ever been taken for granted by the people you love, please, tell me your story in the comments right now. I need to know I'm not alone. And hit that subscribe button, because this channel is where we fight back and rebuild our legacies. The silence on my 65th birthday wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. The kind of stillness that presses on your chest when you realize you're alone in a house built for a family. My late wife, Eleanor, always threw a party that filled this Florida Keys estate with sound and color. She knew how to make a house a home. Now, it was just the rustle of the palm fronds and the slow, rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock she adored. I sat on the lanai, the setting sun painting the gulf a desperate orange. I wasn't looking for gifts or fireworks. I just wanted a connection from the two people left in my world, my daughter, Serena, and her husband, Blake. They lived the high life in Miami, a life I had worked my entire career as a resort property developer to give them. My thumb hovered over the message app. I typed, then deleted. Happy birthday to me. Too needy. Just checking in. Too casual. Finally, I settled on a simple, vulnerable truth. Just wanted to say I love you both. Thinking of your mom today, I hit send, a sigh escaping my lips, carrying the weight of the last 5 years since Eleanor passed. I had poured everything into Serena after her mother was gone, trying to honor Eleanor's last wish to see her daughter settled and happy. In hindsight, I didn't settle her. I subsidized her. I was trying to buy back the time cancer stole, and I used money as the currency. The reply came less than a minute later. My heart gave a stupid, hopeful jump. Maybe they were just busy. Maybe they'd forgotten the date, but not the man. I opened the message and felt the air evacuate my lungs. It wasn't angry or emotional. It was cold, corporate, and utterly clinical. Dad, we need space from you. Please don't reach out anymore at all. We're going through a lot and need to focus on ourselves. I read the 12 words once, then twice. It was a formal termination of a relationship. Space I had given them, a fully furnished life in a luxury high-rise. What more space did they need? But the words weren't the real blow. My focus sharpened on a tiny detail right below the text bubble. A digital seal of approval that took my heartbreak and dipped it in pure, unadulterated acid. Blake had liked the message. A small red heart. My son-in-law, the man whose failed crypto art gallery startup I had funded 3 times over, had given his digital applause to my daughter's cruelty. He wasn't just complicit. He was celebrating the dismissal of his meal ticket. He was cheering on the woman who told me. My dad texted, "We need space from you. Please don't reach out anymore at all." So I just... In that instant, the fog of grief and loneliness that had defined my life since Eleanor passed lifted. The sorrow was replaced by a hard, crystalline resolve. It wasn't fury. Fury is messy and emotional. This was strategic. A quiet, controlled fire. I realized I was not a father to them. I was an ATM with a heartbeat, and the machine had just been told to stop talking. I walked inside, my hands perfectly steady. The first thing I did was open Blake's contact and hit block this caller. Then Serena's. The digital silence was now on my terms. I picked up my landline and dialed a number I hadn't used for anything other than a pleasant chat in years. David Sterling. A familiar, professional voice answered. David, it's Alan Sinclair. I need you to initiate a full freeze on the Coastal Trust, effective immediately, and book me for 9 a day and tomorrow. It's time to talk about the silent inheritance. That moment, I stopped being just Dad. I became the sole trustee of the Coastal Trust. Spent the rest of that night in Eleanor's old study. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I cataloged the last 5 years in my mind. Not as a heartbroken father, but as a cold, calculating businessman reviewing a catastrophic investment. The investment wasn't the money. It was the love, the time, the sacrifice, and it had yielded a toxic return. To understand the brutality of that text, you need to understand the toxic foundation I unknowingly built. Eleanor was the anchor. When she was alive, she balanced my ambition with her compassion. Our fortune came from grit, taking cheap land in emerging coastal areas and building high-end, environmentally conscious resorts. We weren't old money, and Eleanor made sure Serena knew the value of $1. We had a pact Serena would have the opportunity we never did, but she had to earn her success. But cancer took her 5 years ago, and I was left with a gaping hole where my compass used to be. The moment she was gone, my clear vision blurred. I became terrified of losing my daughter, too. My life turned into a desperate, 5-year attempt to keep Serena glued to me, even if the glue was gold. My final promise to Eleanor was simple. I'll take care of our girl. I misinterpreted that promise. I thought taking care of her meant removing every obstacle, cushioning every blow and funding every dream, no matter how delusional. I was trying to buy back the time cancer stole, and I used money as the currency. I made a monumental mistake. I started writing checks to cover up the gaping wound that Eleanor's absence left in Serena. Every time she struggled, every time she missed her mother, I didn't offer a shoulder. I offered a credit card limit increase. This wasn't fatherhood. It was a desperate bribe for affection, a transaction I was losing badly. The Coastal Trust became the mechanism for my weakness. David Sterling, my lawyer and friend, set it up after Eleanor's death. Its purpose was dual: to protect my assets and provide for Serena. The assets, the resort holdings, the high-rise condo in Miami, the Hatteras yacht, and the liquid capital were tucked into this irrevocable yet fully revocable trust. I was the sole trustee. Think of it as a huge steel safe. I alone held the key, but I had handed Serena the combination. Serena and Blake were living the life of perpetual entitlement. They saw the trust as an extension of their personal checking account. I remember the incident vividly. It was 2 years ago. Serena was enrolled in a prestigious MBA program, something Eleanor had dreamed for her. I was footing the 6-figure tuition bill. After 1 semester, she called me, not with remorse, but with a yawn. Dad, I'm done. It's just so much work, and honestly, what's the point? It's all just book learning. I have the capital to start my own ventures now. The ventures were always Blake's harebrained schemes. He was a classic smooth talker, sharp suits, perpetual tan, zero substance. His crypto art gallery was the latest disaster. It bled money for 18 months straight, soaking up the $500,000 I gave them. Blake treated the money not as a seed investment, but as a notification of withdrawal. He never sent a business plan, just an email saying, "Wire the capital, thanks." When I gently suggested he should try to find outside investment, actually convince a stranger his idea was viable, he laughed. It was a genuine laugh, the kind of laugh that tells you everything you need to know about a man's character. Why would I? The bank of Dad has the lowest interest rate. That line, I realize now, was a glaring clue I should have acted on. But I didn't. I hung up the phone, felt a familiar knot of disappointment, and wired the money anyway. Why? Because I was terrified that if I said no, they'd stop calling. I was an old fool funding my own isolation. Blake wasn't just a husband. He was the chief financial officer of Serena's entitlement. He actively encouraged her dependency because it meant his lifestyle remained intact. I paid for their $15,000 monthly rent in Miami's exclusive Brickell district, their titanium Amex black card, their cleaning staff, their dog walker, and Serena's absurd collection of Hermes bags, all quietly flowing from the trust. I became the invisible hand of their financial miracle. The hardest truth of that night was accepting my own failure. I had spent years desperately trying to honor Eleanor's memory by giving Serena everything. But in doing so, I fundamentally betrayed Eleanor's values. She believed in earning it, in character over comfort. I had done the opposite. I hadn't given Serena a foundation. I'd given her a fully furnished penthouse and a lifetime supply of resources, and she was complaining about the landlord. And Blake's red heart beneath her dismissive text, that wasn't a mistake. It was the final undeniable proof that they were a united front, celebrating the act of cutting the cord on the emotional baggage me while assuming the financial tap would flow forever. They had fired me as their father, but expected me to stay on as their banker. My grief had made me blind. I was so afraid of being alone, so desperate to keep my daughter close, that I allowed myself to be bled dry financially and emotionally. I knew my plan had to be flawless. It couldn't be a simple cutoff. That would be messy and temporary. This had to be an execution, a clean, legal, and utterly silent dismantling of their entire reality. It had to be a lesson that the world doesn't bend to your will just because your last name is Sinclair. It was the only way to possibly salvage the character I had helped destroy. I had to break my promise to Eleanor, the promise to cater to Serena, in order to uphold the true promise to raise a woman of substance. If you've ever been the black sheep, or if you've had to make the agonizing choice to cut off a toxic relative for your own sanity, let me know in the comments. I'm starting to think this is a more common tragedy than we talk about, and if you've been through it, you know how much it hurts. The meeting with David Sterling the next morning wasn't a conversation. It was a surgical consultation. His Stamford office, high above Long Island Sound, felt like the control room of the financial world. It smelled of expensive leather and quiet power. David had seen it all, dynasties collapsing, fortunes shifting. He didn't offer sympathy. He offered strategy. "Alan," he said, folding his hands on his pristine mahogany desk. "I've been waiting for this call for about 3 years. You've been feeding the crocodile, hoping it would become a vegetarian. It was never going to happen." His validation was a profound relief. I wasn't just a bitter old man. This was a rational response to a genuine threat, not to my money, but to my dignity. I had to face the reality that my sacrifice wasn't seen as love. It was seen as a right. I laid out the facts of the previous night with the detached precision of a client reporting a breach of contract. The text, the block, the feeling of being dehumanized into a resource. I explained how I truly believed that by cushioning Serena, I was somehow protecting her from the pain of losing Eleanor. But David just looked at me and shook his head. "You were protecting yourself, Alan," he said simply. "Protecting yourself from the fear of being truly alone, and she figured out the price for keeping you quiet was a blank check." He opened the thick, leather-bound folder. "The Coastal Trust. Let's review the chains," he said. He didn't call them assets, he called them chains. They were the very things binding my daughter to a life without consequence. "The Brickell condo," he started, "held by the trust, not owned by Serena. She thinks she owns it, but it's a trust asset. The lease agreements for the G-Wagon and Blake's BMW M3 in the trust's name. The titanium Amex and the Visa Platinum guaranteed by the trust's liquid assets. The $40,000 monthly allowance, a direct disbursement from the trust, deposited automatically on the 1st of every month. I was the grantor, the one who funded the safe. I was the sole trustee, the one who held the only key. I had all the power, and yet I had allowed them to run my life. I had been too weak to use the key. "You have absolute unilateral control," David confirmed. "You can open it, Take things out, put things in, or change the beneficiary instructions at any time, for any reason. You have been funding an insurgency against your own dignity with your own money. I had never used the mechanism of control before. I had only ever used the mechanism of provision. The weight of that realization was heavier than any financial loss. I had been paying for my own prison sentence. "Here's what we do," I said, my voice low and steady. I felt like I was giving orders on a hostile corporate takeover. First, the immediate cuts. Section 3.2, immediate termination of all credit lines and guarantees. Cancel them. Don't freeze them. Cancel them. Make the denial permanent and undeniable. Second, the monthly disbursement. Stop it. Effective 8 a.m. This morning. They won't notice that until tomorrow. The first, when the money doesn't arrive. Third, the long-term cuts initiate the 30-day eviction notice on the Brickell condo. The trust is the tenant, and the trust is terminating the lease. They have 30 days to vacate. And finally, recall the leased vehicles. David didn't flinch. The repossession notice is quick on the vehicles. That can be done by end of business today. I leaned forward. Excellent. I don't want to fight. David, I want a silent, systematic unplugging of their entire reality. They asked for space. We are giving it to them in a way they never expected. We are turning off the supply. While I was meticulously planning the implosion, Serena and Blake were having lunch at the Surf Club restaurant in Miami Beach. I pictured the scene with agonizing clarity, a world of linen suits, $50 cocktails, and hushed tones. They were performing the role of influential socialites, a performance I had paid for. Serena would be taking an artfully composed photo of her truffle pasta for her social media feed. Blake pontificating about his investments. The leather-bound bill folder would arrive. Blake, with his practiced air of nonchalance, would hand over his titanium Amex Black Card. He wouldn't even look at the 4-figure total. The money wasn't real to him. It was a river that flowed endlessly from a distant mountain I had climbed. A few minutes would pass. Then the waiter would return, his professional mask struggling to conceal a flicker of awkwardness. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Blake, but the card was declined." Blake's first reaction would be a short, incredulous laugh. "Declined, that's impossible. Run it again. Your machine must be malfunctioning." It would be a statement of fact, not a request. In his world, that card simply did not decline. The waiter would oblige, returning moments later with the same result. The titanium Amex was dead. Blake, annoyance mixed with a surge of genuine embarrassment, would pull out the backup platinum Visa. "Here, use this one. It has no limit, but it did have a limit now. A new one, set to 0. The waiter's third trip would be somber. Serena, sensing a true problem, would finally stop scrolling. "Blake, what in the world is going on?" she'd hiss. She would offer her own Sapphire Reserve card, daring the universe to deny her. It would be declined. The table, once their stage, would become an island of quiet, escalating panic. They'd be stranded in one of the most expensive restaurants in the world, unable to pay for lunch. Blake would pull out his phone, a desperate attempt to restore order. "I'm calling Dad. There's been some massive screw-up at the bank." He'd press the call button, expecting the familiar ring. But there would be no ring. Just the flat, immediate silence of a call that goes straight to voicemail. He'd try again. Same result. Then he'd try texting. "Dad, what's going on with the cards? None are working. Call me." He would hit send, but instead of the reassuring blue bubble, a green bubble would pop up. Below it, a small, damning notification in red letters, "Message failed to send." He would stare at it, his mind refusing to connect the dots. Then the horrifying realization would dawn on him, cold and clear. This wasn't a banking error. This was a deliberate wall. "He blocked me," he would whisper, his voice hollow. "My own father blocked my number." Serena's face would turn pale beneath her expensive makeup. The problem wasn't about the lunch bill anymore. It was existential. "What about the allowance?" she'd demand, her voice sharp with accusation. "The $40,000 it was due today. It has to be in the checking account." "It's automatic." With trembling hands, Blake would open the banking app. He would stare at the balance, his expression slowly changing from panic to utter despair. "It's not there," he'd say, the words barely audible. The transfer never came. I knew the feeling in that moment, the total, unadulterated shock was exactly what they needed. They had been living in a fairy tale. Now, they were officially in the real world, and the tab was due. My only regret was that it took my own dignity being incinerated to finally teach them that lesson. I knew the feeling in that moment, the total unadulterated shock was exactly what they needed. They had been living in a fairy tale. Now, they were officially in the real world, and the tab was due. My only regret was that it took my own dignity being incinerated to finally teach them that lesson. The day after my meeting with David, my silence became my primary weapon. It wasn't passive. It was an active, strategic absence. While they were flailing in the dark, my life settled into a rhythm of deliberate calm. I spent the afternoon on my Hatteras yacht, not for pleasure, but methodically replacing a corroded anode, a small, necessary piece of maintenance. It was an apt metaphor for my own life, replacing the toxic elements I had allowed to build up. I knew the first few days would be pure confusion for them. They had spent their lives believing the financial laws of physics didn't apply to them. The credit card denials at the surf club were the first physical crack in their reality. But the chaos wasn't localized. It rippled through every invisible pillar holding up their lives. The next ripple hit their social facade. Serena's entire identity was built on her Instagram account, her curated lifestyle, her designer wardrobe, the view from her balcony. The decline of the credit cards meant the immediate cancellation of all her automated subscription services, the curated organic meal boxes, the monthly wine club, the private yoga instructor, and most importantly, the $1,000 week personal assistant who managed their appointments and, more critically, their social media posting schedule. The house cleaning service was the next to go. I could picture Serena, dressed in her expensive athletic wear, growing impatient for the weekly service that never showed. She would get a cold, professional text from the agency. "Your service agreement has been suspended due to non-payment." The Dust Bunnies began their silent conquest of the immaculate Brickell condo. It was a small victory, but it meant they had to look at the grime they didn't create, the consequence they couldn't swipe away. For Blake, the closed door was a psychological blow. He would arrive at his exclusive South Beach gym, a place where trainers cost more per hour than most people earn in a day, only to have his key fob denied at the entrance. The receptionist, with a practiced, sympathetic smile, would inform him that his membership had been frozen. For a man whose entire sense of self was built on effortless access, a closed door wasn't an inconvenience, it was an insult to his very being. His usual swagger would crumble into a pathetic blend of confusion and mounting rage. Then came the humiliation that only a world built on loans can deliver the liquidation. Pride, for them, was a luxury item, and it was the first thing they had to sell. I knew Serena would go straight to her most liquid assets, the designer handbags, the ones I had bought her out of love, now being converted into survival cash. She and Blake wouldn't go to a common pawn shop. Their pride wouldn't allow it. They would visit high-end consignment boutiques on Madison Avenue, pretending they were simply curating their collection, while desperately hoping the check would be large enough to cover next week's mounting expenses. They were using the very gifts of my misplaced love to fund their immediate survival. The irony was a sharp, bitter kind of justice. Every dollar they got was a physical acknowledgement that they were selling off the past I provided, desperate to cling to the present they couldn't afford. The chaos and silence must have driven them to a desperate pitch. The attempts to reach me would begin, not just on my main line, but on old, obscure numbers they hadn't used in years. I had set my phone to automatically silence and log any calls not from my direct contact list. My technology became the silent butler, turning away the unwanted guests at the digital door. I didn't need to listen to their voicemails yet. I knew the tone, the initial anger, the forced calm, the fake concern. The storm was building, but inside the walls of my resolve, I was at peace. I was simply giving them the space they requested, but on terms they never imagined. The final, unavoidable blow, the one that would shatter their last illusion of control, was coming. It was merely a matter of time. The money they got from selling their handbags was a teacup trying to bail out a sinking yacht. I was the one who had opened the hole in the hull, and I was simply waiting for the inevitable to surface. The worst part for them wasn't the lack of money, but the lack of control. They couldn't yell at a bank. They couldn't threaten a lawyer they didn't know, and they certainly couldn't reach me. They were screaming into a soundproof room, and their power was disintegrating with every silent day that passed. I had provided a lifetime of comfort, and now I was providing the most valuable, difficult gift of all, the relentless, unforgiving reality of consequence. The money they got from selling their handbags was a teacup trying to bail out a sinking yacht. I was the one who had opened the hole in the hull, and I was simply waiting for the inevitable to surface. The real storm hit on the third afternoon. It arrived in the form of a piece of official paper taped to the imported mahogany door of their Brickell high-rise. Its stark red and black lettering was a violent contrast to the serene elegance of their hallway. It was a notice to vacate for non-payment of rent. I can only imagine Blake finding it, the confusion, the immediate assumption that it was a clerical error meant for someone else. Then the dawning horror as he read the details. Tenant named the Coastal Trust, amount overdue, 2 months' rent, totaling $30,000. Serena's reaction would have been disbelief followed by pure, unfiltered rage. Rent? What do you mean? Rent, we own this place. You bought it for us. Dad. She would have shrieked the word rent, foreign and insulting on her tongue. And that would have been the moment of true soul-crushing revelation for Blake. He would have had to admit the truth. Perhaps for the first time even to himself, I thought we did. He always just handled it. They were living in a gilded cage and had never once thought to ask who held the key. The foundation of their entire life wasn't solid ground. It was a rental agreement, and the lease had just expired. The security they felt was an illusion, and it had just vanished. They had less than 30 days to vacate. The luxury condo that was their sanctuary, their proof of superiority, was now just a ticking clock counting down to homelessness. The second blow landed that very same afternoon. Reeling from the eviction notice, their world shrinking to 4 walls. Serena must have decided she needed to escape, maybe to a friend's house to complain, or to her mother's to cry. She would have stormed out of the building, her face a mask of fury, and walked toward the spot where she always left her white G-Wagon. But the car wasn't there. In its place was a tow truck, its yellow lights flashing with a kind of cheerful indifference. Her car, her status symbol, the vehicle she had so proudly featured in her social media posts, was already hooked. Its front wheels were lifted ignominiously off the pavement. A man in a jumpsuit with a clipboard would meet her protests with a shrug. Vehicle has been repossessed. Lessee the Coastal Trust. Account status delinquent. This wasn't a private failure. This was a public spectacle. The doorman who had rushed to open her door for years would watch with a carefully neutral expression. Neighbors would peer from their windows. It was the ultimate social humiliation. A real-time downgrade of her entire existence played out on the streets of Miami. Serena could scream. She could threaten. She could cry. It wouldn't matter. The man with the clipboard held all the power. The truck would groan, pull away from the curb, and take the last vestige of her curated life with it. The 1-2 punch of losing their home and their transportation in the span of a few hours shattered whatever composure they had left. Panic in the face of a declined credit card is one thing. The terror of impending homelessness is another entirely. Fear is a powerful teacher. It's the one lesson I had failed to give my daughter. Their desperation forced Serena into a different kind of humiliating act, the social media scandal. With her savings gone, she tried to quietly sell her remaining luxury goods online. Not through a consignment shop, but directly through her private social media channels. The irony was brutal. Her followers, the people she spent years trying to impress, were now watching her yard sale unfold. I heard about it from David, who heard it from his paralegal, who saw the screenshots circulating. Serena posted a photo of 3 Hermes Birkin bags with a caption, "Gently used. Curating my collection for a new focus. DM for price." The comments were relentless. "Thought the Coastal Trust managed your finances. Serena starter home wasn't enough. Is this Blake's latest startup selling your dad's gifts?" The public mockery was the final layer of paint on their miserable picture. She deleted the post within the hour, but the screenshots were already viral within their small, entitled circle. The social currency she had so carefully accumulated was worthless. Their options had dwindled to nothing. They had no hidden funds to access, no allies to call. Everyone knew I was the ultimate source. There was one last desperate and foolish idea left. The source of their problem was also, in their minds, the only possible solution. They had been trying to fight my silence from a distance. Now, they would bring the war to my doorstep. I imagined the final conversation in that empty, echoing apartment was short and grim. All the blame and accusations had likely been exhausted. Blake, his face pale and his eyes burning with a new, dangerous energy, would grab the keys to his last remaining asset, a small, used sedan I had bought him years ago. "Get in the car," he'd say, his voice devoid of its usual arrogance, replaced now with the sharp edge of a man with nothing left to lose. "We're going to the Keys. He can't ignore us if we're standing on his front lawn. He has to face us." They were coming to make a scene, believing that shame or guilt would be the key to opening the vault. They failed to understand that the man they were coming to see no longer lived there. The grieving father was gone. He had been replaced by the calculating trustee, armed with a quiet, impenetrable resolve. The drive from Miami to my estate in the Keys takes about 4 hours. For them, I imagine it was 4 hours filled with a volatile mix of rage, fear, and a desperate flickering hope that a face-to-face confrontation could change things. They still operated under the delusion that their presence, their emotions, held some power over me. They were coming to make a scene, believing that shame or guilt would be the key to opening the vault. I was on the back patio, near the water, when my security system gave me a quiet, discreet notification on my watch. "Vehicle approaching. Unrecognized tag." I didn't need to check the cameras. I knew who it was. The patio, the pool, and the dock were my sanctuary, the place Eleanor and I had designed together. Tending to the native plants and the small bonsai collection was a form of meditation. That day, I put on my noise-canceling headphones, selecting a playlist of quiet, orderly classical guitar suites. The rich, clean music filled my head. The world outside the 10-foot stone wall that surrounded my property, simply ceased to exist. I knew they were at the front gate. I could imagine the scene without seeing it. Blake's hand jabbing at the intercom button with increasing force. Serena pacing on the gravel driveway, her expensive shoes ill-suited for the battle she was about to lose. They would be met with the same thing that had tormented them for the past month: absolute, impenetrable silence. The intercom would not buzz. The gates would not open. From a small vantage point near the gazebo, through a carefully trimmed hedge, I had a clear view of the road leading to the house. I watched as they abandoned the gate and began to walk the perimeter of the wall, looking for a weakness, a way in. They looked like castaways, searching for a breach in the cliffs of an unreachable island. Eventually, they reached the section where the ornamental iron fence gave them a view of the back lawn. And that's when they saw me. I could feel their eyes on me. It was a tangible thing, a prickling on the back of my neck. I knew they were there, standing just 100 feet away, their faces likely pressed against the cold iron bars. I did not turn. I did not acknowledge them. I focused on the task at hand. I selected a small, intricate bonsai tree, a Ficus retusa. I inspected its leaves for any sign of disease. My movements were slow and methodical. I chose my pruning shears, the steel glinting in the afternoon sun, and made a clean, precise cut. This was the true confrontation. Not a shouting match, but a demonstration. My peace against their chaos, my silence against their noise, my closed garden against their collapsing world. They began to shout. I couldn't hear the words. Of course, through the masterful layers of the music. Their frantic cries were reduced to a faint, irrelevant buzzing, like distant insects. But I could see them. I could see Blake's face, red and contorted with rage. I could see Serena's frantic gestures, her hands pleading one moment and balled into fists the next. They were putting on a grand performance of desperation, but the audience couldn't hear them. Their power, the emotional leverage they had always held over me, was gone. Their words, which had once been able to cut me to the core, could no longer even reach my ears. They must have gone on like that for 10 minutes, their energy eventually giving way to a ragged, hopeless exhaustion. And that's when the local security patrol car arrived. My system is programmed to automatically alert the local patrol if the gate intercom is pressed more than 5 times in a minute, or if a vehicle lingers for more than 10. The uniformed officer was the embodiment of professional calm. He didn't rush or escalate the situation. He simply walked over to them, a polite but immovable presence. I couldn't hear the exchange, but I could read the body language, Blake's initial aggressive posture, Serena's tearful, dramatic appeal, and the officer's patient, unshakable stance. He would have quietly informed them that they were on private property and had been asked to leave. They were no longer the daughter and son-in-law of the owner. They were trespassers. The defeat was absolute. They slumped back to their one remaining sedan, all the fight gone out of them, and drove away. Only then did I turn. I took off my headphones. The silence returned, this time deeper and more complete. I walked over to the bonsai. I had weathered their final, desperate assault without raising my voice, without taking a single step outside my garden. I had won not by fighting back, but by simply refusing to be part of their storm. That night, as I drank a glass of bourbon in Eleanor's study, I reviewed the final piece of evidence. I opened the phone's blocked call registry. Page after page of blocked calls from a handful of unknown numbers, all time-stamped between 7:00 p.m. and 4:00 a.m. The system tallied the total precisely 109 desperate, futile attempts to breach the walls of my resolve. I played one voicemail, the final one left around 3 a.m. It wasn't Blake's usual bluster. It was ragged, broken. "Dad, please," he whispered, and I could hear Serena crying softly in the background. "I'm sorry. Okay. I'm truly sorry for the text, for everything. We were stupid. We made a terrible, terrible mistake. We'll do anything. Just please don't do this. We're your family. Please. Dad, just call me back." The experiment was complete. The data was collected. Their entitlement was finally stripped away, replaced by raw, visceral fear. It was the only sound I needed to hear. It was time for the final phase. I picked up the phone again and made a single call. "David," I said when he answered, "it's time. Send them the email." I played one voicemail, the final one left around 3 a.m. It wasn't Blake's usual bluster. It was ragged, broken. "Dad, please," he whispered. And I could hear Serena crying softly in the background. "I'm sorry. Okay. I'm truly sorry for the text, for everything. We were stupid. We made a terrible, terrible mistake. We'll do anything. Just please don't do this. We're your family. Please. Dad, just call me back. The experiment was complete. The data was collected. Their entitlement was finally stripped away, replaced by raw, visceral fear. It was the only sound I needed to hear. It was time for the final phase. I picked up the phone again and made a single call. "David," I said when he answered, "it's time. Send them the email." The email arrived in their inbox the next morning, an electronic summons from the formal, intimidating address of Sterling and Associates. The subject line was simple: meeting regarding the Coastal Trust. They would have seen it as a white flag of surrender. They would believe their campaign of desperation had finally worked. They would think they had broken me. They had no idea they were simply coming to sign their own death warrant. The morning of the meeting, I arrived at David's office early. The final, notarized documents rested between us on his desk. There was no last-minute hesitation. The preceding month had only solidified my resolve. "Are you ready, Alan?" David asked. "I've been ready for a long time," I said. "Let's go to the conference room." I took my seat at the head of the table. Serena and Blake arrived precisely at 10:00 a.m. They looked diminished. The weeks of stress had stripped away their glossy veneer. They were trying to project an image of contrite, responsible adults. Serena began her rehearsed performance, her voice straining for sincerity. "Dad, first, Blake and I just want to say how deeply sorry we are. We realize things got out of hand. That text message was inexcusable. We love you. Dad." They spoke for 5 minutes, their monologue winding through a maze of flimsy excuses and hollow promises. There was no ownership, no real accountability. When they finally sputtered to a stop, I let the silence stretch. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, I placed both my hands on the leather-bound document in front of me. "Thank you for sharing that, Serena," I said, my voice calm, level, and completely devoid of the emotion they had been trying so hard to provoke. "I have listened. Now, I would like you to look at this." I pushed the document across the table. "This is the amended and restated Coastal Trust," I explained. "It will answer all of your questions about the future. You can turn to page 12, section 3. It's the section on primary beneficiaries." I gave them a moment to find it. "As you can see," I continued, "Clause 3.1, which previously named you, Serena, and you, Blake, as the sole and primary beneficiaries of this trust, has been legally and irrevocably removed. Furthermore, the provision which stipulated the terms of the monthly $40,000 allowance and the payment of all associated credit lines and leases has been deleted in its entirety. There are no longer any financial provisions for either of you in this document." Serena's face was a mask of utter disbelief. The final gasp of her lifelong entitlement was the question she asked next. "So," she stammered, her voice a raw whisper, "so, where does the money go?" I allowed myself a slow, deliberate motion. I turned a page in my own copy of the document. "An excellent and practical question, Serena," I said. "If you will both turn to page 15, you'll find the new clause 4.1. It outlines the trust's revised primary directive and sole beneficiary." David Sterling spoke for the first time, his voice adding a layer of cold legal finality. "The entirety of the trust's assets," David clarified. "An estimated $35 million will now be transferred to establish a new perpetual endowment. It will be called the Eleanor Sinclair Legacy Fund." I looked directly at my daughter. "The Legacy Fund," I said, my voice perfectly level, "is a full-ride scholarship endowment for students from low-income backgrounds who have demonstrated exceptional merit and wish to pursue degrees in hospitality management and resort development at the University of Florida." I paused, letting the weight of the last sentence sink in. "That's the program you dropped out of, Serena, after I paid for your first year." I thought it was about time someone actually graduated from there with a Sinclair investment. The collapse was total. The money wasn't just gone. It had been converted into a monument to their failure and my wife's true legacy. 6 months later, I stood at a podium in a university auditorium. This was the inaugural awards ceremony for the Eleanor Sinclair Legacy Fund. I spoke about the dignity of work, the value of a second chance, and the difference between a price tag and true worth. At that same moment, a few hundred miles north, my daughter was learning the language of consequence. The sprawling Miami penthouse was gone, replaced by a small apartment. I imagined her, working the night shift at a large, corporate-owned hotel, the uniform simple and the work honest. I picture her bending down, tired, to pick up a dropped dime on the lobby floor. For the first time, she truly understood the weight of a single coin. Blake had actually found a legitimate job in sales. His arrogance was replaced by a tired but focused determination. As I finished my speech, and the applause filled the auditorium, I realized I had finally honored Eleanor, not by spoiling our daughter, but by saving her character. Later that evening, I was back home, sitting in the Keys garden as the sun set. My phone, which had been silent for 6 months, buzzed on the small table beside me. It was a text message from a number I did not recognize. The message contained a single word and a question mark. Dad. I stared at the screen for a long moment. There was no desperation, no demand. It was just a question, an opening, a first step across a vast canyon of silence. The power to answer, the power to decide the future, was now entirely mine. I placed the phone screen down on the table. I didn't need to answer right away. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the sounds of the evening. The silence was no longer heavy with absence. It was light and filled with possibility. If this story hit you hard, if you've ever had to draw a line in the sand to protect your self-respect, then I want to hear from you. The biggest lesson here is that sometimes the hardest boundary is the most loving act. I gave up $35 million to teach my daughter the value of respect. What is the most difficult boundary you've ever had to set with family? Drop your answer in the comments below. We read every single one, because this community is built on mutual strength and shared truth. And listen, if you want more stories about people who turn betrayal into triumph, who fight back smart and rebuild their lives, then you need to hit that subscribe button right now. I'll be back next week with another raw, honest story of justice and resilience. Don't miss it. Until then, stay strong and protect your peace.